I'm Jim Grismer, Professor and Dean Emeritus at the University of Denver. Welcome to Engaging Ideas, where we bring information and ideas from the academy to the community to help think about real-world questions. Our engaging idea today is the concept of valuing nature. That is, putting an economic value on the services that nature provides. With growing debate about the policies to deal with climate change, it's a timely topic. It's important because it allows officials and the public to more fully appreciate both the financial costs and benefits of various environmental policy alternatives. Joining me at the Crimson Table is Professor Paul Sutton of the University of Denver's Department of Geography and the Environment. Professor Sutton has been involved with this research from early on, working with economists, geographers, ecologists, and other scientists around the world. Dr. Sutton has had a distinguished career and is the author or co-author of over 100 scholarly articles and books. I think you'll find he offers a useful perspective on this topic, one that may spark your own thinking and encourage discussion with friends. So let's begin. Welcome, Professor Sutton.
Thanks, Jim.
Paul Sutton, you and your research colleagues talk about the environment in terms of ecosystem services. So let's begin there. What are ecosystem services and what does that encompass?
Good question. And we'd like to think people know what they are, and most people don't, so it's great to have an opportunity to basically define them. Ecosystem services are the benefits that humans derive from nature. Right? It's pretty simple. Bee pollination, storm protection by coastal wetlands. You can get into taxonomies, and of course, as academics, we do. Yeah. The sort of the consensus that's kind of forming, it's a little bit inchoate, but it's forming, is that there are supporting services, provisioning services, regulating services, and cultural services.
Can you give us a couple quick examples of each of those?
A couple examples of those would be cultural services are the aesthetic benefits of a piece of property might be on Central Park. And you could put a value on it by going, here's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath apartment on Central Park, and here's one that's not. The difference in price can be attributed to the view that they have, and that's an ecosystem service that's right in the market. A lot of these values are not in the marketplace, and a key distinction that is important to make about ecosystem services is not all of them are perceived by human beings. So an example of supporting services are nutrient cycling, right? If you hit a deer on the side of the road, if the county doesn't have someone that deals with it, nature will deal with it. It will get recycled into nutrients and other things, and it'll go away eventually. And so that would be an example of a supporting service. Regulating services are climate regulation, water filtration, the whole hydrological cycle, purifies water, those kinds of things. And then provisioning services are the ones that often end up in the market: food, fuel, fiber, those kinds of things.
So without getting too technical, how does one go about looking at this subject and making this calculation and thinking about it? It strikes me as an overwhelming process. Can you give us a sort of a short version of what that is? Yeah,
so the paper that we wrote in '97 was using the work of a whole bunch of people. So there are different ways to sort of estimate the value of an ecosystem service. You can go with contingent valuation, you can go with market value, you can go with avoided cost, you can go with replacement cost. There's all kinds of methods, and thousands of, literally tens of thousands of papers have been written that do one sort of study. Like they look at bee pollination and they say the pollination of our crops by bees, if we had to replace it with human labor and hand pollinate the crops, would cost $200 billion a year. So our '97 paper was sort of a meta-analysis. It looked at contingent valuation, they looked at hedonic pricing, they looked at replacement costs, avoided cost, those kinds of things.
Building on many hundreds of papers.
Building on many hundreds of papers.
Yeah.
So it's nice if I could give one story
Sure.
to help people sort of believe that this value is credible. So it turns out that wetlands, coastal wetlands, protect us from the damage that hurricanes and storms inflict. And so how would you put a dollar value on that? It would be really nice from a scientist's point of view in terms of trying to estimate the dollar value if you could say, well, we'll have a Category 4 hurricane hit Miami, right? And then we'll find out how much the insurance companies had to pay after the damages were all settled. And that would be an underestimate because it would only be what was compensated by the insurance companies. And then we go remove all the wetlands and have it happen again and see how much more the damages were. But we don't get
difficult to implement.
We don't get those kind of controlled experiments with one planet, with climate change either. But we have all the storms that have hit. We can map how much economic activity is there with nighttime satellite imagery. We can use census data to get the population that's there. We can use satellite imagery to measure how much wetlands are there. And we know how much the insurance companies paid for each hurricane. And we have hurricane tracks provided by NOAA that tell us the wind speed, the temperature, the category of the hurricane at landfall. And you can build a statistical model to estimate the value of avoided costs. And it turns out to be $23 billion a year.
The cost avoidance?
Cost avoided. So if the wetlands weren't there, we would have $23 billion a year more in damage. And just because millions, billions, and trillions get spouted around and bandied about and people lose track of that, what is $23 billion a year? The way I kind of clue people into that, well, the U.S. currently invests about $8 billion a year in the TSA. So the equipment at the airports and the people that work at the airports that take my Swiss Army knife every time I get on a plane is about $8 billion a year. So the wetlands are doing 3 times that. And that's a pretty substantial investment, the TSA.
Kidding. So if we go beyond just the wetlands, what is the most recent estimate of the total value of ecosystem services?
Okay, we did the paper in '97, and then we did an update to that paper. And so currently, our estimate is that the total value of ecosystem services for the entire planet, and this is sort of a meta-analysis of many studies, is $125 trillion per year.
Trillion per year?
Trillion per year. And that's another important distinction to make. We estimate ecosystem services on a time basis. So there is this idea of natural capital, which is like the principal. And natural capital has a value that we typically don't estimate. We estimate what is the marginal benefit of that natural capital on an annual basis. So ecosystem services, the value of ecosystem services, when I say like $23 billion for storm protection from coastal wetlands, is per year.
Per year.
So it's like the interest on the principal.
Okay. And so how has it changed from your original study using, I think, 1997 data?
Correct.
To the most recent update? Has there been a change?
Yes, there has been a significant change. And so our 97 data was based on a smaller set of studies of value. So in the time between 1997 and 2014, there had been literally tens of thousands of individual studies of different kinds of ecosystem service value. And so the per hectare value of various biomes, whether it's a coral reef or a coastal wetland or a boreal forest or a tropical rainforest or a desert or a grassland, all of those values, per hectare values, had gone up because we had better information about the value, and we've had land cover change. So in '97, we estimated it at $33 trillion relative to a global GDP that I believe was around 18 trillion. And now we're at $125 trillion relative to a global GDP that's roughly 80 trillion. However, if we use the land cover from 1997, we would actually have been at 145 trillion now if we had not experienced the land cover change that has been going on. As you're probably aware, the Great Barrier Reef is dying. There are pictures of Louisiana where the coastal wetlands are disappearing and turning into ocean. And so a lot of land cover is taking place, and that's why we have seen a loss of roughly $20 trillion per year in ecosystem service value. That difference estimate of 20 trillion is based solely on changes to the areal extent of coral reefs, wetlands, etc. We did another study which involved a study of land degradation, which took another 8 trillion per year off. So we really lost 28 trillion because it's still tropical rainforest or it's still a grassland, but we measured how much photosynthesis has changed and used photosynthesis as a proxy measure of ecosystem function, and that suggests that it's even higher than that. So land degradation doesn't even get incorporated into that 20 trillion per year loss.
So let's move from the methodological world of the academy to the real world and talk about these data. In a practical sense, the work that you and your colleagues are doing, Paul, how is that used? How can it be used to make important real-life decisions?
There's lots of ways to do that. For some studies, you need much more detailed. We're doing broad global studies. We're using benefits transfer, things like that. It doesn't help make particular land use decisions, but it can inform trade-offs of whether you're going to put the Walmart over a wetland or put the Walmart over a grassland, right? There are those kinds of questions in which it can make land use decisions in terms of planning. It can also suggest that we need to value nature more and in so doing put our money where our mouth is. I have an honor student, Sophia Duncan, who just finished a similar analysis of the National Park Service. And the ecosystem services that come from the lands of the United States National Park Service are roughly $83 billion a year, okay? The budget of the Park Service is $3 billion per year. Now, if you have a capital investment like apartment buildings or real estate, typically they say that you need 40 to 50% of money for insurance, management, et cetera, maintenance. So that suggests that the Park Service is underinvested in by an order of magnitude. We are not paying enough attention to our natural assets. So really, I think the big picture is that this ecosystem service valuation is identifying a market failure that really suggests that we need some new institutional mechanisms to value nature and be good stewards of the planet that supports the entire market economy.
Sure. It has always struck me that scientists talk about the environment in one sense, and policymakers talk about it in a complete, and it's as if they're different languages. Do you see this as maybe bringing together and providing a common basis for those discussions?
That has been the primary motivation for this whole project of doing ecosystem service valuation. It's interesting, we came up with this value. It was double the world's GDP,
right,
roughly double, and there are purist ecologists that are like, you've just underestimated infinity. You're engaging in this monumental act of hubris associated with putting a dollar value on something that's infinitely valuable. And then we get critiqued from the other end. The economists are like, well, you're basically saying nature's worth more than twice as much as the market. That's ridiculous. We couldn't pay for that because we don't have enough money to pay for that. And so it really exposes sort of what you were just describing. And so what we want to happen is for people to, make credible estimates of the benefits we are deriving from nature in a common currency. And the common currency people understand is the dollar. And so that's why we did it. We do sort of agree that it's infinitely valuable, but we are not treating it as if it is infinitely valuable. In fact, we are treating it as if it's much closer to zero value. And so I'm sure one of your questions is going to be, how does climate change interact with that? And climate change is a good example of that. If we pretend that climate regulation has zero value, then we can break it. And you don't miss the water till the well runs dry.
Yeah, and it clearly, the climate change discussion, debate, directional dialogue that's going on could use the sort of common platform of thinking, it seems to me, that you all have been developing. Is for example, in the Paris talks or in other processes, has the perspective that you all have brought to this subject been involved in those discussions?
Oh, I think so. I mean, this ties back to one of the questions you asked earlier, where are policymakers? dealing with. So the David Stern report, Stern was an economist, and he basically described climate change as a massive market failure that interacts with all other kinds of market and non-market phenomenon that it's presenting unprecedented challenges to global governance. And it also interacts with ecosystem services. So yes, I think this policy is informing that. President Obama, I'm a little reluctant to say this because the current administration might undermine this executive order of Obama's, which was all government agencies have to take into consideration the value of ecosystem services with respect to all decisions they make that might impact those ecosystem services. So it is creeping into the policy world, right? But as I think it was Schopenhauer who said, truth passes through three phases. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as having always been true. And I think climate change was ridiculed. It's violently opposed. And I think it is getting to the point where it's being accepted as having always been true. We're hoping that this idea that nature has way more value than we have been giving it is also becoming true. I just hope that we can develop the institutions and attitudes that will allow us to be good stewards of the natural environment. And currently the idiot lights on planet Earth are flashing and buzzing. We have dangerous climate change, which is linked to ocean acidification and ocean warming. The Great Barrier Reef may completely die. More than half the world's coral reefs are gone. Wetlands are disappearing. We're in the middle of an extinction crisis, and we talk more about Lady Gaga.
Let me conclude by asking, one of the goals of our series is to encourage people to discuss things, to take in new ideas, and to talk to them with their friends and neighbors and so on. What would be the couple of 2 or 3 main takeaways that you'd like people to kind of remember from your work and from this dialogue today?
Please accept the idea that we are not valuing nature appropriately, and that is why we are encountering all these sustainability issues. I mean, sustainability is in the lexicon, and it is a real issue, and I would argue that if we valued nature more, we would start doing better at addressing the sustainability challenges. So that would be one. Do you believe that nature is undervalued? Okay. Mm-hmm. Do these estimates of the value of nature, are they credible? Do they make sense? When you might hear my little explanation, my Central Park explanation, right? Central Park, if you look, the real estate value of Central Park is worth $500 billion. And a politician in New York could say, hey, we're going to sell it, and we're going to put that money in the bank, and we'll get $25 billion a year in interest. Why don't we do that to reduce the tax burden? And you ask the people in New York, they'd say no. And so that $25 billion a year, is that a credible estimate of the ecosystem service values in Central Park? Right? Because that's the kind of things we do. So that would be my second question. And then what social, political, economic changes do we have to make as a civilization in order to be better stewards of the environment so we can chart a path into the future that is sustainable and desirable?
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you for being here today and for sharing this notion of valuing ecosystem services. I think it helps us all really better understand the complexity and the opportunity, perhaps, in moving forward. I hope that you'll join us in the future as we bring more engaging ideas from the Academy to the community. I'm Jim Grismer. Thank you for watching.